you need to drive decision making within factories for the current strategy and future strategy dependent on this type of data as well. And as I was mentioning, uh, the type of decisions you can drive is my emissions happening with my critical suppliers or non-critical suppliers? And that's exactly a point in terms of why these systems are important more than ever. Is it's difficult to find resources who have that level of knowledge, first of all, right? Like, there are people in supply chains have been doing that for 10, 15, 20 years with those companies. That's no longer a given at any point, right? Like, people are not staying with the same company for that long anymore. So that knowledge is not necessarily gonna stay with that.
Welcome to a new episode of Made to Grow, the podcast made for SME manufacturers. I'm your host, Rich Dale, CEO and founder of FlowLens MRP and MES software, where it's our mission to help ambitious device, equipment and machinery manufacturers to be the best that they can be. Today's episode is essential listening if you're grappling with the complexities of supply chain management or planning how your business can navigate the drive towards sustainability. Joining me today is Nishant Raj, CEO of Value Chain, a company that's making waves by helping manufacturers digitise their supply chains and tackle the all-important issue of Scope 3 carbon emissions. Nishant and I share a unique connection as both of our companies, FlowLens and Value Chain, are lighthouse projects for Made Smarter UK's Smart Manufacturing Data Hub, helping to make digital manufacturing tools and data insights accessible to SMEs like yours. In this episode, Nishant breaks down some critical challenges facing manufacturers today, from managing carbon footprints in supply chains to digitising processes without overwhelming your team or budget. If you're serious about future-proofing your business or have ambitions to tackle a higher tier of customers, there's a lot here that could make a real difference. So this episode, I'm really pleased to welcome Nishant Raj from Value Chain to the Made to Grow podcast. Welcome, Nishant.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. So we've lots of very interesting things to talk about today. Specifically around upstream Scope 3 carbon emissions and how SMEs really get the capacity to deal with that. But before we get into that, just for people who don't know you, don't know Value Chain, could you give us a wee bit of a background to yourself and to the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into manufacturing, let's say by accident, going back almost 10 years ago. So manufacturing was not something that, is a first career choice, let's say, to a lot of people. But for I started doing my internship with Vauxhall, where I got the first introduction into what manufacturing is really about, and you can do so much, and so much innovation stands in manufacturing. And since then, through my previous roles with Atlas Copco and driving digitization and Industry 4, you could start to see that manufacturing has become a very centralized place where innovation is quite a key. So with having that experience, I came over as CEO for Value Chain. And Value Chain is a supply chain, a B2B SaaS company supporting SMEs and OEMs to digitize the supply chain, enable supply chain collaboration, and more importantly now, allowed to create sustainable supply chains, which is quite important in the world that we are in, that we have to be conscious of what our impact on the world stages.
100%, yeah. I mean, we both work in scenarios where we're helping SMEs address, the thorny challenges that they have, and supply chains, an age-old challenge, and never more so in the last few years with everything that's been going on, all with that kind of looming net zero target. Hopefully many can try and exceed the government target, so we can make an impact. But the good thing about our world is, we're seeing an array of SMEs, an array of manufacturers, and the kind of issues that are affecting them. So what sort of trends are you seeing at the minute?
So What we have started to see both in the supply chain and in general in the manufacturing space where most of our customers sit. The first is about digitization of processes and systems, because if you're relying on Excel to be able to manage your supply chain, if you are using custom Power BI, those all work well enough into in a silo. When you have one person looking at it, it does not scale with the business. And we have started to see those type of customers starting to want to put a robust system in place, which is not an individual dependent system that if that person leaves, nobody can operate it, but also being able to scale and reduce the risk, because the world events that are happening, which nobody really in our space can control, you need to be prepared for that. Be it the pandemic, the Ukraine war, the Red Suez Canal crisis, or the Baltimore incident as well. And all
Mm-hmm.
of these start to impact your supply chains. And if you think in a world where data is available, you have such smart systems. And giving an example of Tesla, who couldn't produce cars because they couldn't get the chips delivered in time.
Yeah.
Yet this is a company who's building autonomous cars, right? Which is all based on data and prediction. So you start to think, why can't those systems be utilized or built for simplifying supply chain decision making? And that's where what we are seeing right now happen is there's a more push, not just the bigger OEMs, but also smaller SMEs go towards digitization of their processes and bringing more important systems in place, which will assist them. The second aspect coming in is sustainability. Uh, Supply chain used to be, let's get the cheapest suppliers from wherever it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's no longer okay, because your customers are starting to ask you to fill in ESG requirements as a part of being approved as a supplier. And also, it's no longer the cost being just the cost of procurement. The cost includes your carbon footprint within that procurement process as well. And that's starting to become something that larger OEMs and SMEs are starting to take an understanding of and trying to see, is it my critical suppliers where I'm having my largest carbon footprint, or is it my non-critical suppliers? Do I need to have a dual source process available in place? So we're starting to see awareness come in the domain with regards to this, but we're still in the early stages where this becomes a must-have rather than uh, a competitive factor that businesses who are as early adopters are picking this up and being able to generate more business and create a better name for themselves.
We'll come on to maybe how SMEs, with all of their time poverty and competing priorities, can um, access this kind of stuff. But just for those that aren't familiar specifically with the details of the different scopes, and particularly the upstream scope 3, can you give us a bit of an overview of that?
Yeah, so when you talk about carbon footprint, you have your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which are happening, you know, direct reactions to what you're doing in your factory, on your products, in your plants. Scope 3 are indirect emissions that are still linked in to you as a company. And specific aspects of that include your supply chain, right? So you have numerous components that you are sourcing from different places. Which are could be off the shelf parts, or it could be different processes that are happening at a supplier, including from the point where it originated and being even excavated from the materials being excavated from a quarry. All of those have a carbon footprint that's being added into that on that product. And that then when you get those parts and then add it to your product, and then ship that to the customer, that entire thing has a carbon footprint in place. So scope 3 upstream emissions specifically is quite critical, but also difficult to capture if you do not have a supply chain collaboration happening, because a lot of practices right now rely on doing average estimations, which have a very large, say, error threshold currently. But that's where it becomes less effective. Whereas what we see is that if you know who your suppliers are today, what components they're supplying to you, when they're supplying to you, what frequency, what methodology, what method of transportation it's using, that all of that information helps you quantify the upstream scope 3 emission to you. You can also calculate the scope 3 emissions effectively, with due to logistic, which is you shipping those products to your customers as well. So those are all different aspects of the scope 3 emissions that can be captured. There's also the impact of obviously whatever processes your suppliers are doing added on as onto the product as well. And that's also something that we are working with a few companies to enable that, even if we can't directly capture that, but have some sort of representative data that can enable that aspect, because unless you start to deploy sensors at every suppliers, it's difficult to get that level of detail. Having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not going to happen in the future, because the way the direction that this is headed is you want the end-to-end connected supply chain where you can actually get real-time data transparency across everything.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by FlowLens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with FlowLens. Now, back to the interview. I mean, coming back to that trend, we're seeing that ourselves with our SME device and equipment manufacturers, where they're starting to get asked, particularly those that are selling into larger companies who are already coming under the obligation to report, but they're asking the same questions as how accurate is this actually going to be, so the time is right, and I mean, you mentioned one of the downsides, but it was like being, the how hard it is to actually estimate and figure out, particularly 2 or 3 steps down the chain, really how much, how accurate can you make it. So are there other downsides to the current approaches that really make these numbers meaningless, or?
Yeah, I think it's goes to all the way back about why do you want to capture that and what you're going to use it for, and that will drive the right type of processes and strategies for this. Because if you're going to do this as a tick box exercise, just so that you have something to show to a potential client, it might get your short-term tick, but it will not be sustainable in terms of the long-term relationship that you want to build, and to be able to leverage this type of information to the right factor, because you need to drive decision making within factories for the current strategy and future strategy dependent on this data, this type of data as well. And as I was mentioning, the type of decisions you can drive is my emissions happening with my critical suppliers or non-critical suppliers? And that makes a difference, because with critical suppliers, there's only some certain aspects that I can change about that. With non-critical suppliers, I should be looking at alternative supply chains or alternative partners where my carbon footprint would be lower, or other processes to be able to do that. And if I can't do any of that, then I should be looking at buying offsets as well. So buying carbon credits that can offset my emissions as well. Now, these are things that larger OEMs are now understanding and starting to do those processes, but SMEs are still very new to this aspect. But the reliance on that data will become more and more. So the quicker companies can get into a more robust dynamic process, which is giving them their emissions and linked to their products or their supply chain in a more accurate way, they can make better decisions and can create a more competitive advantage versus somebody who's basically just using average values to be able to showcase that this is what it potentially is, but no way of actually proving that that's where our emissions lie, or how can we actually improve it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's a case of, at the minute, it's a bit of a Wild West situation, but people are not going to accept averages and assumptions for very long. How do you make this accessible then for SMEs? Because not to mention there's the technical piece, there's the supply chain piece, there's just the headspace, but I take your point. I think, and you're seeing this already, where manufacturers want to differentiate on sustainability, and they're thinking for the long term. And we see this with people investing in systems, but they've maybe been driven because they can't get staff, or they margins are tighter, so they need to be on better sort of, or on control their costs and so on. Um, and obviously that's our business is sort of democratizing those kinds of tools. So how does that work in this scenario?
Yeah, so the way that we integrate with our current and potential customers is they would have an ERP system today to be able to manage their internals of the factory. And we will connect on top of any ERP system that exists to be able to then onboard their supply chain. And enabling supply chain collaboration is one of the key aspects of making this information work, but also having it built in a very simple user friendly way, such that it's not a new system that you have to go and learn, but it's like, I like to say, as Apple, it's intuitive.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
features and functions are as you would expect it to be. uh, and that's critical for any SME, because the adoption for the SMEs and their supply chain to be able to use a system to be able to report this a type of information and automate as much as possible, to make sure that there's less manual uh, inputs or heaviness required, because that's when the data starts to shift a bit if you're relying a lot of input or manual data. And in our case, because we already tap into the ERP systems of their customers, we know who the suppliers are, we know how often certain products are being shipped to them, where is it being shipped from, what methodology of transportation is being utilized. All of that data that's coming on a dynamic basis to us allows us to give a carbon footprint of scope 3, upstream scope 3, across all your suppliers. Or you can look at from a product wise as well, like where that's the scope 3 emissions in the product that's coming in. And that straight away, which is a dynamic dashboard, gives you a decision making toolkit that you can utilize. And you know that the system being put in place, you can rely on the data because it's coming from confirmed sources. And you also allow for suppliers, as a part of the collaboration tool, to be input averages where it's relevant, which is, for every product they're shipping, from the internal processes they may be doing, being able to put certain the values on that. So you start to balance that out, that there's still some estimations, but the aspects that you can automate to get a more direct reading, you are able to do that. And we are starting to see a lot of that happen. And as part of that, what you and I, and we're working with another startup out of Singapore, we're looking at is how do we enable capture of even the internal data in a more autonomous manner, because through the different data points that are already happening, from water to electricity to machine utilization, everything that you're doing inside the factory is creating an emission factor. And how do we connect all of that to offer a plug and play toolkit to any of the SMEs? And I think that is the critical aspect that we see personally. Is it's important to make sure that any of these toolkits, what we are doing, what you are doing, or anything that we have our partners looking at, becomes a plug and play tool and the lower barrier for entry for SMEs.
Yeah.
Because inherently, and all the only the 10 years that I've been in manufacturing, I've seen there are way too many larger organizations doing software in manufacturing who become too big, doing systems that are too complicated,
Hmm.
and the price points which no SME can afford, which is one of the reasons we see the lack of digitization in manufacturing.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, our kind of product, like FlowLens, is designed to be a best in breed MRP, ERP, primarily for device and equipment manufacturers. That means we can stick to our knitting. We integrate with Zero, best in breed accounts package, also QuickBooks and Sage for those that are still using Sage. Um, Obviously, we're developing a partnership around this supply chain collaboration piece, and I think that message is important because Um, there's a lot of hype about manufacturing technology, almost to a fault, that where I think it's maybe saturating people's minds and they don't know where to start. Um, but the message is you certainly don't need to invest hundreds of thousands of pounds in some monolithic platform that won't fit exactly what you need, and you'll still spend another £100,000 to get the kind of capabilities that we're talking about in this call. But you can create what people call the app stack, so and that means that companies who have that vision um, can start they can start small. Some of our customers have started effectively as one or two people in a workshop and are now 20, 30, 40, 50 people businesses over the last 4 or 5 years. They've grown, and these products can grow with you. I think that's the message. um, but they avoid you growing headcount, because can you imagine how much admin it would take to have somebody figure out and interact with all your suppliers to get all of this information.
Massively. And that's exactly a point in terms of why these systems are important more than ever. Is it's difficult to find resources who have that level of knowledge, first of all, right? Like there are people in supply chains have been doing that for 10, 15, 20 years with those companies. That's no longer a given at any point, right? Like, people are not staying with the same company for that long anymore. So that knowledge is not necessarily going to stay with that. What you do want is robust systems put in place that leverages that knowledge so that new people coming in, and making it simple enough that the systems could be run by graduates, not just relying on 10, 20 years of supply chain expertise. And that's where the systems need to go at. But also, as you rightly said, and we've spoken to a lot of customers about this, is previously what, and they've been used to doing, is having once 4 or 5 procurement people or buyers basically chasing the same supplier for different parts, and it depends on who's shouting the most will get the response and the output that they require. And the black hole of once a purchase order has been deployed to actually knowing when things are going to come, to what time, to what deadline, to the quality, is effectively you are just relying on your relationship with those suppliers. And
Mm-hmm.
when you have thousands of suppliers, you are only going to concentrate on the handful that are the most urgent at any point in time. And I think that these are all things that are inefficient within the processes and how companies do it today. And where we are starting to see the customer starting to actually take notice of that we can't continue to do this. And we have to build in a simpler process and set up that scales as we are growing, as the market is changing. Because then you are not just relied on individuals, but a system that allows you to, make sure that your business keeps performing and running, not just based on one individual who knows all ins and outs of your supply chain.
Exactly. That individual gets hit by a bus or wins a
Yeah,
lottery ticket.
yeah.
You're snookered. Um, so one of the things that you're working on with the Smart Manufacturing Data Hub is a lighthouse project, and you're looking for some SMEs to get involved. Could you just summarize what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are working through the SMDH grant on a project called Data Sync, and we have specifically went in with this project of building and capturing Scope 3 emissions and analytics that can be done for the supply chain. And as a part of that, we already have our existing customers who we are building it with. But as part of this project, we are allowing up to 5 SMEs to come on board with us, free of cost on the SaaS side for the first year, and only the integration cost with the ERP is what they would have to pay for. We've already got 3 SMEs that have filled up the slots, and we are looking for 2 more SMEs. We're looking to digitize the supply chain, start on the journey of understanding the emissions within the supply chain, and allow the collaboration within the supply chain to happen. So we were quite keen to work with companies who are looking to do that and offer them a risk-free approach through this project on being able to leverage parts of the system which is already proven and in use, and the newer innovations that are coming through this project.
Hmm. Well, that certainly would be of interest to many of our our customers, so we'll take that one offline.
Absolutely.
So sorry, what's the deadline for that?
So we are accepting customers up till basically mid of October. So not a lot, a few more weeks that we have got now. So anybody who's interested, they can contact, get to the contact details that will be available in the description, and obviously can reach out to Richard or me on LinkedIn if they wanted to get more details off from us.
Okay, no worries. So just to wrap up, I think it's probably worth I ask listeners to ask my guests to leave our listeners with, a piece of advice. So how would you sort of sum this up right now, and what would you leave our listeners with?
There's a quote that I always utilize for myself, and it's the same I would say is the future you see is the future you get. And it's quite important to think about not where you are today, but where do you want to be, and then work your way backwards from what are the things that you would need in place and who are the people who you need supporting to make sure that you get there.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Cameron Herold, who wrote a book years ago called Double Double, and it was really about his vision of doubling the turnover in his business at the time, and it was all about creating that very what he called vivid vision, and writing it out really, or writing the press release for your company in 2028 or whatever. So I'm a big fan of that. So you mentioned LinkedIn there. What's the best way for people to get in touch?
So again, both on LinkedIn, or they can go on our website www.valuechain.com, and they can actually submit a contact us form on there, or they can register interest for this project as well, as there's links for that where they can submit the details, and we'll get in touch with them.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Nishant. Like I say, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. It's been very informative, hopefully reassuring for our listeners that we're starting to kind of make this whole world accessible. And I look forward to working with you on it.
No, thanks, Risha, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks again to Nishant for joining us today and sharing such valuable insights. One of the most eye-opening parts of our chat was how SMEs can turn sustainability into a competitive advantage by getting a handle on their Scope 3 emissions. It's clear that digitising your supply chain isn't just about efficiency, it's about staying relevant in a fast-changing world. If you're looking to future-proof your business, I hope today's episode gave you some practical steps to consider. Thanks for listening, and if you found it useful, please subscribe to get the next episode in your inbox, and consider leaving us a 5-star rating on your podcast app of choice. Next time, it's just family, as we'll be discussing all things data, implementation and insights with the team here at FlowLens. I'll be introducing Holly Steele-Nicholson and Mar van Niekerk, who will share their invaluable insights about implementing software in SMEs worldwide. We'll discuss the power of good data in unlocking insights, opportunities and growth, with some useful examples from a new business intelligence service we're introducing to the UK. Stay tuned for more. Till next time.